I'm going to go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum present of 7 members. Takes us to item C1, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to board operating procedures. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Just a little bit about our evening this evening. We've got 3 activities. We have the board workshop now that starts at 5:30. Then I guess we have 4 activities because after this board workshop, we will adjourn and then we'll be in partial celebration of January being Board Appreciation Month. We'll be having dinner together, a little nicer dinner this evening for the board members. Then we'll be coming back for 6:40 for a public hearing for the Texas Academic Performance Report, and then our regular meeting starting at 7. So actually dinner will be here in about 30 minutes. Before then, on the agenda, we only have, on the workshop agenda, we only have one item. That's consideration, discussion, and possible action related to board operating procedure. This is something that we do as a matter of practice once a year. It's good for us to recalibrate ourselves with these procedures that many of which come from local policy, but some of which are just covenants that you have made with each other. These are not the superintendent's operating procedures or the administration's, but they're the board operating procedures. And these are how you have decided in the past and how you will do your business, both in meetings and out of meetings. And so it's good for us to be able to talk about those once a year, especially when we have a brand new trustee. And so again, welcome Mrs. Green. So I know she's seen these before and has gone through them pretty quickly. I mean, and pretty well. So I think she's well versed on that. So I'm going to start on page 4. With the board member ethics. This is actually a part of our board policy, BBF local. It has been since the year 2000. But just a reminder that as a board member, when you sign on for service for public schools and College Station ISD, these are the things that you are committing to. And it does spell out ethics on the side: equity and attitude, trustworthiness and stewardship, honor and conduct, integrity of character, commitment to service, and student-centered focus. So you can kind of read through some of those, and as I said, those are part of our adopted board policy. I guess I should just say this now. Stop me at any time if there's anything you want to talk about, questions you have, or comments that you want to make on any of these particular ones. Flipping again over to page 7, after board authority. The role of the board. All of this is set forth in 4 different board policies. The role and authority of the board member and or board officers. First is no board member or officer has authority outside of a regular duly called board meeting. No board member can direct employees in regards to performance of duties. Then it talks about the 3 different officer positions that we have in College Station ISD. Board president will preside at all meetings, appoint committees, call special meetings, and sign all legal documents as required by law. Vice president will act in the capacity of president in the absence of the president. And the secretary will keep accurate record of board meetings, call meetings, and act in the capacity of the president in the absence of the president and the vice president. Mr. Nugent earlier was very happy to send the red folder to Mrs. Nolan for her duties now as board secretary, keeping up with all those meeting minutes. Role of board in executive session. As you know, the Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, does allow us to go into executive session for certain specific items. While we are in executive session, the board can only discuss those items listed on the executive session agenda as limited by law. Any vote that will be taken must be done in open session. And discussions that occur during executive session must remain confidential. Questions and comments on that? Okay. Communication. A little bit bigger section here. First one, individual board member requests for information or reports. Board members shall request information or reports through the board president to the superintendent. So just a reminder, if there's information that you want, that you need to know, please email Mr. Harris and myself simultaneously, and then we can work through that particular issue. The superintendent will gather the information and report and disseminate it in a timely manner to the entire board. So one person asks for it, all 7 will receive that information. Board members are encouraged to advise the superintendent of questions or concerns on the agenda items before the board meeting, and that's been for years now. We've been great about that. If you have questions that you're going to be asking on items that are coming up, to let us know kind of what you're thinking, so we can have the adequate information ready for you when we get to the regular meeting. So, citizen request or complaint to an individual board member. This is when you're approached in the grocery store, on the soccer field, at church, those types of things. What is it that you have said that you would do in regards to that particular individual? The first thing, the board member will hear the citizen's problem for full understanding. I know that's really what any citizen who's coming up and talking to you wants, is the ability to be heard. And so really sit down and give your full attention to what their situation is. If the constituent requests assistance in addressing an issue or problem, the board member shall first evaluate the validity of the claim. If the request or complaint appears to be valid and is urgent, or it's complicated, or has potential for a major consequence, the board member shall refer the request to the superintendent or designee for administrative action. So big items, obviously you're giving me a heads up, giving me a phone call or text or something about that as soon as possible. If the request or issue is not urgent, the board member shall clearly explain to the constituent the district's chain of command. The board member shall then direct the constituent back to the system to talk to the teacher or principal, transportation officer, and the like. And as we're talking about in board training the other day, the people who are most easiest and most able to address situations for our constituents are those that are closest to the problem. The teacher of the classroom, the coach of the team, the principal of the campus, the transportation director, those types of folks. And so getting to them as quickly as possible to meet our constituents' needs is vital. A board member may need to provide the constituent with contact information. The constituent shall be invited to contact the board member again if a timely response is not received from district staff. Questions on that? Comments?
I do actually have a question. So about if it's not urgent, the board member should direct them to the correct person. Mm-hmm. So say that someone comes to us and they've already talked, and you go through the whole thing and you say, okay, did you talk to the teacher? Yes. Did you talk to the principal? Yes. And then the next step is, the next person. And I know that's not you. And I will usually get on the website and try to figure out what it is, mm-hmm. just by looking at contact information. Is there an easier chart or something that I'm missing?
It kind of depends on the situation as to, it could be a human resource issue. It could be a student services issue, which is Mrs. Hester. It could be a curriculum instruction issue. So perhaps in that situation, I might suggest letting the person know, let me get your contact information, and I'll get back in touch with you momentarily, briefly, and let you know the exact person to call. Because that's probably somebody residing in a central administrative role. Make sure we get them to the right person, because nothing is more frustrating to somebody who is upset than getting passed around to the wrong person.
Right.
I can tell you how it's clearly not always appropriate, but I'd say for most of them, what I do is reply back to them and say, in essence, I'm copying him and saying, we'll have the right people get in touch with you. And then what he does is usually kind of reply and copy the right person, so that basically a couple of emails and they get put together. Because the reality, I'm probably going to guess wrong more than I am right on who the right person is.
I'm afraid I'm doing
and it seems that, that way people understand that, okay, we've heard it and we have processed it through the appropriate administrative official, and he's gotten it then to the right detailed person to make sure that they have the information or in the appropriate position to deal with it. That seems to work pretty well.
It does.
Okay.
So you're never wrong in sending the superintendent, but okay. I think the way Mr. Harris handles it is great.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Send everybody to Chuck. We'll take care of it.
He gets copied sometimes.
Citizen request. The next one is employee request to individual board members. It's very similar. The board member will hear the employee's problem for full understanding, repeat the problem back to the employee, explain the chain of command, remind the employee the due process procedure, and remain impartial, and refer employee to appropriate person in the chain of command. And again, if you don't know, let me know so that we can get them to the right person depending on where they are in their particular airing of their issue that they have. So And the board members are encouraged to notify the superintendent as quickly as possible after learning of an issue. And that is what we ask, that if you hear something, just let me know so we can be aware of it and managing it from our end. Okay. Questions? Next item, board member visit to a school campus activity. Board members are encouraged to attend special events on campuses. Board members shall not go into teachers' classrooms or go to campuses for the purposes of evaluation or for investigation. Board members must notify principal of visits to campus when they are not attending a scheduled activity. Okay. Questions, comments on that? Communications. Superintendent will meet with the board president on a routine basis. The superintendent will communicate with all board members via regular transmittals, which we do once a week. Superintendent will communicate information in a timely fashion to all board members. Requests to superintendent from any board member will be distributed to all board members, as we kind of talked about earlier. Media inquiries to the board. The board president shall act as the official spokesperson for the board to the media, press on issues of media attention. All board members who receive calls from the media should direct them to the board president or designee. Individual board members can answer the media questions related to their personal stance on pending issues. However, the board president will be the official spokesperson for the board as a whole. Mr. Board President, you okay with all that?
Do I have a choice?
Yeah, you do.
No, it's, no, I
Make it a
like it. I think
secretary
it
if you
works
want to.
well, and I think people generally understand, and people are careful about saying, and quite frankly, I have too, when they ask about my opinion, it's like, okay, well, as one member of the board, here's what I believe. And then I try to draw that bright line between, okay, what that was, and then what the board decided. And sometimes that gets into the why. As much as what we actually did. I mean, usually what we actually did is readily apparent, but the why is generally where I think it's important to be careful that you're saying that's my opinion is one of seven, not the opinion of the board, because we don't usually, when someone makes a motion, it's not followed the action, the because, meaning so we don't officially adopt a why. But I think the group does a good job of that and not trying to speak for the board out of turn.
Okay.
Any other thoughts?
Again, these are your operating procedures. If there's any changes you want to make or discussions you want to have, bring them up. Moving on to anonymous phone calls and or letters. The College Station Board of Trustees encourages input. However, anonymous calls or letters will not receive board attention, discussion, or response and will not result in directives to the administration. Confidentiality is strictly maintained whenever possible for those who do give us their identity. So, constituent conduct during board meetings. This
Well,
is
let's stop there. I mean,
Okay.
I'm just sitting there looking. Is it misleading to people to think confidentiality is maintained? I mean, it's maintained until someone asks for the information in most situations, right? Because it's all public records.
when somebody emails or sends a letter to the board of trustee, that would be an open record, yes, subject to being shared with other folks
I'm guessing that's covered by when possible.
when possible. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It's technically right. Does it create the perception that it is confidential? Obviously not. I mean, there is some stuff that is confidential and would be covered clearly.
Certainly. Yeah, information about a student, identifiable information, those types of things would be confidential.
I mean, I don't know. It's not that big a deal to me, but
Are you contemplating striking that last sentence?
I mean, yeah, because the reality is, I mean, it's not confidential. Thoughts?
Well, I think,
We can leave it if y'all
I mean, I
want.
think that we're keeping it confidential when possible. Like you said, we strike the names out of minors and things like that. If it's an open record, it's right. I mean,
you could add something that says something to the effect of, but is subject to open records requests. I mean,
Yeah, I like that. Like
Subject
at the
to the
beginning.
Public Information Act.
Yeah.
I like
Subject to the Public Information Act, comma, confidentiality is strictly maintained when possible.
Is there another circumstance where, other than that it might not be confidential?
Oh, if it were subpoenaed, if it were part of an in that type of court proceeding, I guess, but I don't know how often letters to the board are being subpoenaed.
I mean, I'm fine with that. We can put, you can add an or otherwise at the beginning. You know, I kind of right before your comma to cover subpoenas and,
The lawyer in you comes out.
well, I mean, the concern I would have is that we create the impression for members of the public that something they send us is confidential.
Right. No, I get what you're saying, and I think that there should be something else to the effect of what Dr. Wesson said.
But this is only referring to anonymous phone calls and letters, right? It's not general
So
correspondence from the community.
thank you, Mr. Schaefer. So we've talked about anonymous phone calls. And it's almost like this needs its own bullet. Because it's really not having to do with, it's just, okay, if you do give us your name,
Right.
we're going to try to keep it confidential. So perhaps we take that and make it a whole new bullet and beef it up a little bit more.
Yeah, I like
Yeah, because we don't want to dissuade people from reporting things.
Right.
You know, so I think that calling out another bullet would be important.
What if we took anonymous off there and just said phone calls and or letters to the board? And then we have the first bullet talk about confidentiality will be maintained with any information that's received to the limits of law and the Public Information Act, whatever words we try to put in there. Second bullet can be talking about the anonymous won't get any type of attention from the board. Does that
I
flow
like
a little
that. So
better?
you're striking
makes
anonymous
sense.
from the title.
It's strike anonymous from the title.
That's good.
Okay.
Phone calls and written correspondence or phone calls?
Well, while we're in here,
There you go.
I would probably say electronic communication as well, because you can get a
Mm-hmm.
Hotmail account or those types of things as well. So add that in there as well. Are you good with that? Okay.
Just
Electronic
written
correspondence.
communication.
Sure.
I'm just trying to think of how you say it without having to have one of these ridiculous lists that we come up with where they still reference mimeograph
Facsimiles.
machines and facsimiles and all that. But I mean, whatever you
figure
think
it
is
out.
appropriate. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Good conversation. We good with that section? Okay. So the next portion right here, all the way through the end of page 11. So the balance of page 10 and page 11 come from BED local, and they concern constituent conduct during board meetings.
Page 11 is blank.
So
It's
through
true.
page 12.
Is there? Oh gosh, sorry.
Oh, it's 12.
Sorry, we had an extra page in there evidently. I was supposed to be doing this for our audience, so we're starting right here with constituent conduct during board meetings. What we're talking about is our constituents' ability to be able to address the board on items that relate to posted agenda items or on issues concerning something that's not on the board agenda for that month. We have traditionally in this district for a couple decades at least provided a small amount of time, roughly 3 minutes, and that's what our board policy is now and board operating procedures. During our regular board meetings, we provide 3 minutes for folks to be able to address the board on any item that they wish. what you see here on constituent conduct kind of plays out the rules that we have in our current board policy. So constituent participation in a regular board meeting. A person may address the board on an agenda or non-agenda item by completing the note card next to the sign-in sheet and giving the card to the board executive assistant or clerk prior to the public comment agenda item. Non-agenda comments will be heard at the time listed on the routine agenda. Agenda comments will be heard at the time the item appears on the agenda, and that's because if it is an agenda item, we can respond or ask clarifying questions, and so having that at the same time as the proposed agenda item and proposed action makes a lot of sense. Next big bullet, board response to persons addressing the board. During the regular meeting, the board shall not engage in dialogue with persons during the board meeting on non-agenda items in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. Board president may direct the superintendent to investigate issues raised by speakers and report back to the board through transmittal or a designated meeting. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Each speaker is limited to 1 opportunity at the microphone, regardless of the minutes used. Unused minutes from one speaker cannot be accrued by another. No more than 5 persons may speak about the same position on a subject. The first 5 persons who submit a note card will be recognized to speak on that particular issue is what we're talking about. Board president shall recognize persons who sign up to speak in the order the cards were submitted to the secretary. We may need to change that to board executive assistant or clerk to be congruent. 10. Okay. Person addressing the board shall stand at the microphone and state his or her name and address before beginning the comment. That's even more important these days as we are being videotaped, and so we can hear the audio clearly. Sign-in card shall request speakers to be respectful in their comments. The board will not allow derogatory comments. No signs or placards shall be brought into the boardroom. The audience shall refrain from talking or applause during the comments. The president shall read the following introductory remarks before the public comments are listed, and those are the ones we read every time. And then participation in public hearings is the same as sections A and B above with the following changes. The introductory remarks change to reflect the difference in a setting is a hearing, not a meeting, and you get 4 minutes instead of 3. Board members shall again not answer questions or enter into dialogue except with their attorney in the case of an employee hearing. Each speaker is limited to 4 minutes, and no limit shall be made on how many persons may speak on an issue or position. And the board may elect to receive electronic or written input relating to the issue being discussed. I read a lot of that to you. Any questions or comments, concerns regarding constituent feedback during board meetings? Okay. Moving on to board meetings.
I got one question on the, I think one thing that was kind of distracting last time, you know, we talked about no signs or placards. Taking over the computer and looking for stuff. I mean, it's one, not that I have a problem with it, but it does take away from their 4 times. Or do we want,
So
what's the
yeah.
difference between
So if
placards and?
So if I'm recalling what you're talking about, Ms. Schaefer, it's some of the public hearings that we had for the last boundary adjustment, folks wanted to get on the computer and manipulate it and look for streets and attendance areas, and that fumbling around with the computer was a little distracting, and it ate into their 3 or 4 minutes that they had. So are you suggesting maybe put some information on there about you'll receive oral testimony only, or I'm struggling with how to say don't fumble with the computer, but.
I mean, they were trying to identify. Sorry, Chuck.
If it's a map, I think it's something that's important that I don't have a problem them giving us a handout or something like that, but just the fumbling of the computer. I mean, we're spending a lot of time.
Were they using the slides that were in the presentation that was given, or they weren't pulling
They
up
were,
things
yeah.
from the-
Yeah.
Some of it was.
Some of it was real helpful for me when they were
Yeah,
showing
that's
us things, so I don't want to take it away from them, but I agree. I think I don't know how we could make a more organized way to do that for people in that
In the future.
circumstance. Yeah, but it was very helpful. I mean, it helped me make some
Helped me a
decisions,
lot.
yeah.
Yeah,
I do
and
know
and I
what you're
mean, as
getting
long
at,
as it's
though.
eating the time, I mean, we could then control it. Like if that became an issue, like I'm thinking back to the one person who was trying to get us to a certain map so they could identify precisely where they were. He could have done his spiel and then said, "Hey, can y'all ask them to put up and identify right where that is," or something like that, and we could have. But yeah, I thought that was actually helpful.
And as long as they're not, and I actually thought about that while it was happening as well.
'Cause their time is clicking.
Right. But I mean, it is their time though, and I think they're aware of that. As long as they're aware that that's going to eat into their time. But where was I going with this? I think as long as they are referring back to the presentation that was given, they're not getting up on the internet and pulling up brand new stuff. I mean, I don't know if that needs to be addressed.
They're not bringing their own PowerPoint presentation.
That's more where I
Correct.
was headed.
Correct. They were just pointing out from the district presentation. I don't know how that's addressed. But I did think about that, about how it was somewhat distracting, but it was also very helpful for me because I'm such a visual person. So I see both sides.
You kind of halfway know where I was going.
I do, so I'm getting some conflicting. So it seemed like not everybody was on board with restricting the use of looking at our stuff that was up there, but perhaps maybe restricting somebody coming up with their own PowerPoint presentation and using our electronic device. Because a lot of time they will, if they've got a presentation, they will give you a hard copy and hand it to everybody. So we do have something in there about receiving,
The board may
may elect to
receive.
receive electronic or written input related to the issue being discussed.
Wonder if they were going to use part of our presentation and they, before they started using their minutes, could you please put that one
Yeah.
map up there before I start? And then
Yeah, I don't think anybody came to the meeting thinking they were going to use that. They
Right.
saw it up there.
I
It's
think
like,
right.
oh, that's a
I
good
agree.
idea. I can go
Right.
back there. Yeah.
It seems like we've had someone bring signs before, though. Or was that not a board meeting? And I think it was during boundary adjustment. It might have been during a community forum. I mean, I can see it. I can, actually, I know who did it. Me too. No, you okay? No, I mean, no, it's not bad. No, but I mean, I remember them standing in front with a sign. But I guess a community forum, that's,
No, the community forum is a public hearing. So that begs another question. It says in here there will be no applause.
laws.
Yeah, we said that earlier, right? That was on page 10. So that is oftentimes applause does happen and is allowed. So is that maybe time to rethink that language? Or should we still have that in there?
You know, the reality is, I think it goes okay. As someone who's sat there with the gavel in their hand trying to figure out, okay, how rigidly do I follow this policy? Or do I let people provide their form of comment? Where I really drew the line was when it was maybe over somebody else's speaking or became disruptive to the meeting. I mean, that's really what you're trying to avoid. But there were times, particularly at public forums, where, I mean, we all know people are going to clap for the people they agree with. And I don't have that big a problem with that. I don't like people booing people they don't agree with because it can have a chilling effect, I think, on information, which is good to get. I mean, and I think we all think that, but I mean, to me, warts and all, I think it's worked pretty well.
So top of page 11 says the audience shall refrain from talking or applause during the comments. So your point, Mr. Harris, that anything that would be taking away from the speaker's ability to provide information to the board would be something that would not be allowed, but perhaps applause at the end of somebody's comments would be all right.
Well, yeah, I mean, and let's see, I think it's also, I mean, during the meeting. I mean, we had some meetings where I do remember having to say something because it became difficult for us to have a dialogue. And at that point, I mean, that's when it's inappropriate. It's like, okay, look, we get you have a strong feeling on it, but we're trying to hash through it and actually make a decision. And that, I think, is the intent behind this. It's not have it disrupt actually what we're trying to do, which is work through the process and communicate with one another, as well as get information from members of the public who choose to stand up and speak. But I think, and I thought it worked okay, and I at no point during the meetings did I feel like this is out of hand. And the reality, we can always adjourn the meeting, or I mean, ask for assistance in enforcing a policy. So I mean, at least those are my thoughts. As I sat there and actually read that and tried to work through it, running a meeting. Anybody else?
So we have placards. No, what does it say? No signs or placards shall be brought into the boardroom. That is part of board policy and our board operating procedures. And so it's up to, if we are seeing that happen, and be up to us to
Yeah.
police that when that happens.
I mean, I think
if we
it
want to.
depends. Signs or placards, I mean, I think it depends on what they're doing. If somebody has a visual display that they're going to come and use as part of a presentation, it's fundamentally different than, a sign advocating a position that you're trying to disrupt communication with, or communicate directly with that instead of actually standing up in front and communicating the point.
Maybe the word disruptive?
Well, I don't want to put disruptive. I mean, again, I think it worked okay. I mean, in fact, we had, I believe at one time, Chuck can help me if I'm wrong, we actually had some signage that people were asked, hey, we don't need that in here. And I think, yeah, is that right? And it was no big deal. People were like, oh, okay.
Honestly, I think it went very well. I think what we want to do is just think out in the future. Is there anything that we could do better, or just thinking about other particular issues? But I think you're right, Mr. Harris. During our last several times that we've done public comment, everybody's acted respectfully, and for the most part, adhered to our guidelines here that we have in board policy.
I think so. Agree?
So I'm hearing no changes to this at this point.
I don't think so.
I
Okay
could
with
put
that?
something in there about bringing your own electronic presentation on there.
I mean, have we had people run a PowerPoint through?
Not to try to display it electronically. They may have done one and given handouts.
Yeah, I know we've had handouts. In fact, we had one. It was a fantastic notebook on fine arts.
I say let's just move on.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm sorry, we're on board meetings, and we're on page 13. And this first two big bullets, agenda development and this College Station ISD board, come from board policy BE local. So agenda development for regular meetings shall be as follows. A tentative agenda is created by the administration and presented to the executive committee the week prior to the board meeting. The board encourages the superintendent to include at least one report on student achievement or issue closely related to student achievement at regular board meetings. Board members shall submit agenda items to the president at least 8 days prior to the board meeting, and items so submitted shall be placed on the agenda. A draft agenda is sent to the board members electronically at least a day before the official agenda is posted, 72 hours prior to the meeting. At least 72 hours in advance of each meeting, the board members will receive information for all agenda items, including title, purpose, background, relevant state statutes as needed, related district policy as appropriate, proposed cost, if any, funding sources, etc. Second paragraph, the College Station ISD will meet in a regular monthly business session on the third Tuesday of the month in the CSISD boardroom. Changes in the date and place to accommodate the holidays and special events will be approved by the board in advance. Additional meetings may be called as needed. Emergency meetings may be called according to requirements set forth in the Texas Education Code. Questions on agenda development or how we get items placed on the agenda, or timing, or anything related to that? Everybody good with the third Tuesday of the month? Okay. Normal agenda for board sessions shall be as follows. Their public work session, and then I'm going to skip a little bit over that. This is just goes over what our regular boilerplate agenda looks like. Call to order, quorum, welcome message, pledges, recognitions, board announcements, superintendent, hearing of citizens, consent, and then reports and executive session if needed. All right, moving on to page 16. I went quickly. Members of the audience.
Do,
Yes, sir.
do we need, well, I guess what I'm saying, something to give us a little wiggle room on that structure? Because I know there are times when we talk about, hey, should we move this to the beginning or the end, or does
Well,
that really matter? I'm trying to break down the detail of it.
this is the normal agenda for a board session shall be as follows. Sometimes we make some changes to it. So I think we're okay with this. It's just kind of stating, these are the things that we
Got it.
talk about monthly.
Got it.
And roughly, I don't know that the order matters too much.
Got it. Okay.
Page 16, again, this is from going back to Policy BE Local. Board meeting procedures. 4 board members shall constitute a quorum. The board shall observe parliamentary procedures in Robert's Rules of Order. All discussion shall be directed solely to the business currently under deliberation. Board president shall keep the discussion to the motion at hand and shall halt discussion that does not apply to the business before the board. For under voting, the board may vote on all action items and can make or second motions. I'm sorry, the president may vote on all action items and can make or second motions. In the case of a tie vote, the item is postponed. The president shall bring the item back to the board on a subsequent agenda. When only 4 board members attend a meeting, a unanimous vote of those 4 members is required to pass the motion, not 3 out of 4. The board president has the right to recognize board members prior to their giving comments. And talking about executive or closed sessions, closed session agenda items can be declared in advance and listed on the agenda, or a board member can, during a meeting, request a closed session on any agenda item that qualifies under Texas Government Code. It says here Texas Education Code, exemptions to the Open Meetings Act listed above. So we can't just go into executive session for any reason. It would have to be one of those ones that's covered safety or land purchase or those types of things, evaluation. Electronic devices shall be turned off or silenced. Board member with emergency needs for outside contact during a meeting will notify board members in advance. Board members shall dress and act professionally. Anybody want to talk about the last one?
Builder
A
casual.
little bit.
Builder casual.
Questions on those? Comments, concerns? Board development. At a workshop retreat training, each winter the board superintendent team evaluate their effectiveness, review operating procedures, and conduct new board member orientation. We are reviewing our operating procedures right now. We had new board member orientation last night. So item 2 there, the evaluation of the board and superintendent is an indication of the success of the governance team is having and meeting established goals. In a workshop meeting, the board reviews and revises annually the core beliefs and commitments each year in November, December, and January. The district's vision statement, belief statements, priorities, and goals are disseminated to employees and public via the district website and at school and community events and printed materials, and report to print and live media. So we definitely do that. This is, we have kind of had this practice some years, and some years we have not. Interested if the board wants to continue to have this in our operating procedures. You want to talk about this process, leave it here, have a discussion. Up to any of y'all. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Criteria and process for selecting board officers. Candidates for the president of the board, vice president, and secretary must have at least 1 year experience on the board. Officer elections are held following the November general election of each year. And if board officers are not available to conduct officer elections, the superintendent shall assume that role. And that comes from BDAA local on officer elections. That's what we have. Questions on that last part? anything that we're missing that we think that we need to talk about as a team, or the board needs to talk about as a team, in regards to how we conduct business during meetings or outside of meetings? It should be reflected in a board operating procedure.
Anyone?
So we can do this one of two ways. You guys can approve the board operating procedures with the changes noted earlier, not having really seen the changes, or we could just bring it back briefly in February and show the updated verbiage that we have and have you approve it in February. How would you like to proceed?
I'd like to see the updated verbiage.
I was gonna say.
All right.
Do too.
We're happy to do that.
Okay. All right, anything else?
No, sir.
Well, I think with that, we are adjourned for the workshop, and we will be back.
6:40 for the public hearing on the Texas Academic Performance Report.
Okay, thank you.